Good afternoon and welcome to Gettysburg National Military Park. My name is Jim Flook. I'm one of the seasonal rangers here at the battlefield, and I get the privilege of presenting these programs over the summer months. And this afternoon we're going to be talking about the fighting that takes place here on Culp's Hill. So a couple of things just to make you aware of. We will be moving down one of the trails here. It's a short jaunt, about 100 yards or so, but just kind of watch your step. You're going to have loose stones and some things. It'll be about 50 minutes in length. We'll start out here after we move down the trail. We're going to make 3 more stops. We're going to talk about the breastworks that are built, talking about the 78th and 102nd New York. Then we're going to move to the 137th New York, talk about the right end of the line on the night of July 2nd, and then we'll extend onto what we call Little Culp's Hill, the spot of the 2nd Maryland Battalion, and talk about the fighting that is on July 3rd. We've got a small group, just with 4 of you, so please feel free to ask questions. Somebody asked earlier, our friend Matt here is going to be filming the program, and he's doing that for 2 reasons. One of the things the park is trying to do is to get more of a social media presence. So if you use Facebook, I'm going to encourage you to like us on Facebook. You got to type in Gettysburg National Military Park, all 4 words, in order to get us. But when we put these online, we usually throw up a link on Facebook. They go up onto the park blog. And so the park blog gives us the opportunity to do in-depth writing and some video format that helps bring the battlefield to people wherever you're at. It doesn't replace being on the site. Film is limited, but it helps give us that picture. So we'll have a camera alongside us today, but if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I want to start out with giving you a little bit of a picture of what this place looks like. One of the challenges of being on a battlefield 151 years after the fact is figuring out what the terrain would look like. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass this around for you. Now this shot is taken pointing north. So as you're looking at this photograph, again, this undergrowth foliage is not here. Culp's Hill is still a fully wooded hill. It is going to become important to the battle on the evening of July 1st. The fighting here at Gettysburg begins to the northwest of town. By late in the day, 27,000 Confederate soldiers have forced the 17,000 Union soldiers that are here to retreat. Those Union soldiers are falling back to Cemetery Hill. Cemetery Hill is just behind you and slightly to the northwest. Cemetery Hill is the exact opposite of what we see here, and by that I mean that it is completely open. Soldiers said that Cemetery Hill stuck out like a sore thumb. Anybody ever hit their thumb with a hammer? It puffs up. That's the description the soldiers used to talk about Cemetery Hill. And they're describing it as this bald platform. Okay, so we're going to pull out a map here. Cemetery Hill, the key point in the Union position, is sort of here at the northern point. We've come slightly back to the southeast, and we're over here on Culp's Hill. We'll be talking about the fighting on July 2nd and also July 3rd. So this point on the battlefield is identified that night of July 1st as Union soldiers are gathering from their retreat onto Cemetery Hill. Confederate soldiers are going to identify this hill as well. It's a fully wooded hill next to what becomes the key point on the battlefield. Some of the retreating 1st Corps soldiers will recognize this spot, and their commander, division commander by the name of Wadsworth, brings his men. They occupy a part of these slopes as a way of extending the line that is over on Cemetery Hill. So they've added another hill on their right flank. Confederate soldiers late at night are going to send a small party of men, a reconnaissance party, moving up through the woods. Again, as we think about this foliage that surrounds us, look at the tallest trees. That gives us an idea of the density that the soldiers are dealing with. Most of this undergrowth is gone. That undergrowth would be gone because there are animals nearby, and these animals are eating up all of this low growth foliage so that they have food. That Confederate party that makes its way up here, a portion of them will be captured, a portion will survive. And so they're going to report back to the Confederate line that this hill is occupied. As we open July 2nd, both commanders decide that they will stay here on the battlefield and keep fighting. The Union Army, early in the day, is going to place its 12th Corps here on Culp's Hill and Lower Culp's Hill. Culp's Hill and Lower Culp's Hill will have a total of 10,000 Union soldiers as the day begins, but that will also change over the course of the day. The Union plans for July 2nd are to extend the line. So again, they're putting more soldiers here on Culp's Hill to protect that key point of Cemetery Hill. And they put more soldiers on the left, Cemetery Ridge, and stretching down to the south, again protecting the left flank. Confederate officers, as they make their plans in the morning, are going to decide to make a two-pronged attack. They're going to take 14,000 soldiers and they're going to attack from the southern end of the battlefield from south to north. They're going to be about a total of 6,000 to 7,000 soldiers who will attack here on the northern end of the battlefield, moving from north to south. They will strike both Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. The basic plan of the Confederate Army is to pinch Cemetery Hill from two different sides, what in military terms we would call a pincer. So we have the basic outline of what is taking place on July 2nd. Now, those orders are going out in the morning. It takes several hours before they are actually executed. In these hours that are being taken up as Confederate officers plan and coordinate their movements before the attack, these Union soldiers are not simply standing still. Their commander is going to make a very important decision. That commander is right over here, George Sears Greene. Greene has one of 6 brigades that is placed here on Culp's Hill. He has about 1,600 soldiers. He is a professional soldier, having graduated from West Point. Born in 1801, he is the oldest general in either army who is here present at the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, this important decision that he is going to make is in preparing the hill. He is going to build breastworks. We're going to move on to our next stop. As we move down this trail here, we're going to move down to the 60th Ohio and sort of take a right. We're going to be tracing out the line of the Union soldiers. So we're walking next to the position where they would have built their breastworks 151 years ago. And I'm going to give you a story of what it is they're building and tell you about the confrontation that takes place between Greene and his superior officer. Greene, I said, has one of 6 brigades. He's not actually in command of the whole position. And he's going to have a bit of an argument that is told to us by one of the staff officers about what should be done here to prepare these soldiers to fight. You join me, we're going to move down the trail and we'll take up that story. Yeah, we're not stopping here though, I apologize. But I did want to point it out to you since you're from Ohio. So you get, 66th, I goofed there. All right. You got everybody, right? Okay. So this one is the 60th. I goofed. We went down to the path by the 66th and then the 60th. And as we keep moving, as we're coming down here, this sort of trail basically traces out where these Union defenses are being built. So if you're thinking about how this battle is being fought, you're going to have Confederate soldiers coming from your left. You're going to have these Union soldiers sort of to your right or immediately to your left, and that's where they built their defenses.
What's the elevation on this hill, roughly?
Elevation on this hill, we are somewhere between about 500 and 600 feet. The highest point on the battlefield on Big Round Top is just under 700 feet. And so you don't have a lot of elevation in terms of you're thinking of hills and mountains, but what you do have is you have a lot of quick change. And so you have a lot of places where the ground is undulating. And what I ask people, if you want to figure out how much elevation is important, start with your height. How tall are you?
A little over 6 foot.
6 foot, okay. The most important distance to you vertically is 6'1". 6'1" change in the land is enough to cover you if you were a soldier and give you concealment. 6'1" change in the land is enough to expose you where you're silhouetted against the sky and become a perfect target. So when you think about elevation on the battlefield, it's more about those small changes. Overall terrain, we're just a few hundred above sea level. Yeah, it's a great question. Any others? All right. So we've stopped here at the monument to the 78th and the 102nd New York Infantry because this monument helps give us a visual description of what these soldiers are going to build. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a bit of a confrontation. This confrontation is going to take place between General Greene, who is a West Point trained officer, and General Geary, who is a politician. Geary is the division commander. A staff officer recounts the conversation between the two of them this way. On arriving, General Geary expressed himself as adverse to the practice, that is, of building breastworks, on the ground that it unfitted men for fighting without them. General Greene, replying that the saving of a life was of far more consequence to him than any theories about breastworks, and so far as his men were concerned, they would have them if they had time to build them. So they're going to construct defenses. Breastworks are constructed typically by digging down into the soil a foot or two. So as we see where this tree line is at today, imagine that we were right along these Union breastworks. We're going to dig down a foot or two. We're going to pile up logs and rocks to a covering height about shoulder high. We're going to put another set of rocks on top and a big log or headboard. What that does is it gives the soldier protection. His entire body is blocked. It is only his neck area that is exposed. It's exposed because there's space between that headboard and the rest of the defenses to place the rifle through. General Greene, in his official report, described it this way. Our position and front were covered with a heavy growth of timber, free from undergrowth, so none of this smaller green stuff would exist, with large ledges of rock projecting above the surface. These rocks and trees offered very good cover for marksmen. The surface was very steep on our left, diminishing to a gentle slope on our right. As soon as we were in position, we began to entrench ourselves and throw up breastworks of the covering height of logs, cordwood, stones, and earth. So again, take a look with me at the monument here to 78th and 102nd New York Infantry. These soldiers, when they come back to the battlefield, place in their mind a little bit of what these breastworks would look like. We can see stones and logs coming up to about shoulder height of the soldier. The one piece that is missing would be that head log, which would protect the head. On the Union side, many of these wounds were upper chest and neck area. So Union soldiers are using the delays that are taking place on the Confederate side in order to prepare. On the Confederate side, these soldiers are waiting for the attack to take place at the other end of the battlefield. The attack on the northern side is secondary. So they're waiting. Once that artillery fires, Confederate artillery to the north will begin firing as well. When Confederate artillery on the north end of the battlefield begins firing, they find that their position has a great disadvantage. This is the controlling ground. So you asked a minute ago about elevation. The other place where elevation matters is for the artillery. Civil artillery does not shoot uphill. It has these long, flattened, parabolic curves. So they have a very wide open U-shape as opposed to something that goes up and down. That means, of course, you want the higher hill for your artillery. The higher hills are Culp's Hill, which has a battery at the top, and Cemetery Hill, which has up to 40 guns there. Those artillery pieces on the Union side will dominate the Confederate artillery. Confederate soldiers decide they cannot move forward under daylight. The Union artillery has these fields marked too well, and they will simply become killing fields. So they're going to have to wait until cover of darkness. I'm going to pass around a map again here for the detailed attack on the night of July 2nd. The lighter color here is going to be Greene's brigade out of the 12th Corps. We started at the top and we've walked down about halfway down the line. Here we have the 102nd, 78th New York. We'll continue making our way down to lower Culp's Hill. The darker lines here are going to be the Confederate attack. If you want to orient it, turn it sideways, pointing the Confederate line into the woods. Hand that to you to hand around. General Edward Allegheny Johnson will be the division commander on the Confederate side. He is going to say, "I then advanced my infantry to the assault of the enemy's strong position, a rugged and rocky mountain, heavily timbered and difficult of ascent, a natural fortification rendered more formidable by the deep entrenchments and thick abattis. The opposing force was larger and the time consumed longer than anticipated." Well, his estimation on the size of the Union force is incorrect. Although the Union Army begins the day with 10,000 soldiers here, in the afternoon, all the disasters and emergencies of the battlefield are taking place on the opposite end. Orders come for the 12th Corps to abandon this position and move toward the other side of the line. So the units are called out of their trenches, they are formed up. Suddenly a staff officer comes riding up and halts. One brigade is to be left behind. This will be Greene's brigade. So there are approximately 1,400 to 1,600 Union soldiers that are here. Typically they fight shoulder by shoulder, 2 ranks deep. But now they have a lot more distance of trenches to cover. So they're going to spread out one line, and they're going to spread out to about arm's length apart. They have just given up their firepower. That is one of the purposes of standing in these compact lines, and now it's gone. Their numerical advantage is gone as well. Confederate attacker Division Commander Johnson, even though he actually has that advantage, the terrain itself causes him to judge that his enemy is much larger than it actually is. Johnson will have 5,100 soldiers. Greene's brigade is actually at that lower end, right about 1,400 soldiers. This is going to be a description of the opening of the Confederate attacks. Driving the skirmishers They formed column of brigades and advanced directly to the attack. In the gathering gloom of the evening, the line of works held by Greene's brigade could scarcely be distinguished until they were within pistol shot range. The colors were dropped behind the works, the men closely concealed. The rebels advanced to within 10 yards and were received by a volley which staggered, though it did not stop the advance. So he tells us that the Confederate attack is coming forward, that they are massed together, they're focusing, moving quickly. He's telling us that they wait until Confederate soldiers are within 10 yards. Well, they're waiting till they're within 10 yards because it is nighttime. Did you get it? Okay.
Yeah, I'll look at it again.
Sure. So 10 yards, darkness. Your sources of light during this battle, you're going to have the flashes coming out of the muzzles. If it is not blocked by dense smoke from the powder rising through the air, you might every now and again have a little bit of light from the moon. It was almost fighting in pitch dark. This is something Civil War soldiers almost never do. And it's happening right here on the spot. Another Union account of the fighting. Soon after the action commenced, the smoke became so dense that men were unable to distinguish the enemy and were governed more by hearing than sight in directing fire. The discharge of musketry was continued with great rapidity until sometime after dark, when it slackened and finally ended altogether about 10 o'clock. The work was hellish, and the men were glad when it ended that night, for they are sick in both body and mind. I'll repeat that last phrase. They felt sick in both body and mind. This fighting here is going to be very intense for these soldiers. The Union men, as I mentioned, had spread out. They have 1/6 of their firepower. Confederate soldiers, we mentioned, are coming uphill against prepared defenses. In this portion of the line, the Union line holds and is not seriously challenged. Remember, the Union commander said that it was steepest on his left, diminishing to a gentle slope on his right. The end of the line, his right flank, is the area that is in danger. So we're going to move down to that right flank, the 137th New York. I'm going to give you the story of Colonel David Ireland and the 137th New York, the right end of the entire Union Army. If you've been to a battlefield before, you know that the basic Civil War tactic is to strike the end of the line. So how would Ireland deal with this, knowing that he has a force at least 3 times his size coming at him? Follow me. We'll move down to the 137th. And once again, we said that the Union defenses are placed roughly where we see the tree line today. Breastworks, which we've been describing here. This is a photograph of the breastworks here on Culp's Hill. Is taken about July 7th of 1863, so a few days after the battle. We've got a large view here on this side, and then on the reverse side I have an image that's a little bit sharper. And so it is taken probably slightly further to the north, but pretty close to this part of the line. As we come to this part of the line, we're coming to the Union right flank, and we want to pay attention to some changes in the terrain that are taking place. So we'll start first of all, as we look at this foliage moving to our right, it kind of comes to an end, and we see 2 trees that are sort of sitting in this lower ground. In that lower ground, the terrain wraps backwards. That is, it turns 90 degrees. And so we have a little bit of a V shape in the terrain. When you build defenses, you want them to try to follow that terrain. And so that is what the Union commanders do. But they have this point in the line that is very weak. Because Confederate soldiers get in too close, they might be firing upon each other as much as firing at their enemy. So in order to deal with this, Greene, who is an engineer, is going to create what is called a traverse. A traverse is basically a trench. So I want you to imagine a trench that runs roughly from the vicinity. If we can see where those 2 trees are on this side of the road in the low ground, there's a rock between them. So I want you to draw an imaginary line from that rock back toward the tree on the other side of the road. So you want to imagine that we have this line coming down along the foliage, and then we have this traverse or trench that runs roughly at a right angle. It's a relief point in case it would be needed. This again shows us the foresight of George Sears Green as an engineer. He is thinking about the terrain and what might happen if an attack is launched. The unit on the end of the line here is the 137th New York under the command of Colonel David Ireland. The monument to the 137th is just behind us here. You see the 2 rifles and the cartridge box there on the monument. 137th New York is a large regiment. It has 423 men. The attacking unit is going to be Stuart. This is George Stuart, also called Maryland Stuart. Stuart's brigade numbers 2,121 men. All right, who's got their math skills thinking cap on?
5 to 1/4.
What's that?
5 times?
Almost exactly. It is almost exactly a 5-to-1 ratio. Now, generally, you would prefer to have more soldiers rather than less soldiers. That's not always an option. Ireland is the end of the line. What happens if he gives up?
The flank just rolls up.
The flank can just be rolled up. This is a classic battlefield nightmare, this idea that your flank would be rolled up one unit at a time. So whoever is on the end of the line has a very desperate position, because on one side of them, there's no support. And they've been given that reminder by their commanding officer that they are the end of the line and they cannot give up their position. So Colonel Ireland is going to be in this tenuous position on the night of July 2nd. Turn again to your right a little bit more for me. Take a look at the auto touring road. You're going to see that it starts to turn and it goes uphill. That area where it goes uphill again, that is called Little Culp's Hill. The trenches extend onto that hill as well. So Ireland's men, a little bit of them are on Lower Culp's Hill. They are arm's length apart, single line as this fighting starts. One of the attacking soldiers on the Confederate side will write his description of this fight again on the night of July 2nd. We continue to the front, driving the enemy skirmishers before us without trouble and with very little loss, until we met his line of battle at his first line of breastworks. He was, however, driven from those, and soon thereafter we received a front and oblique fire from behind his second line of works, to which he had fallen back. So the Confederate soldier is explaining the attack, and he tells us that the 137th New York is going to have to use that traverse. The Confederate attack with that 5-to-1 manpower advantage overpowers Union soldiers on Lower Culp's Hill. Colonel David Ireland calls upon the right flank to refuse the line. So imagine these soldiers are in a straight line. The right flank is going to drop back 90 degrees. Okay, what has Colonel Ireland just created? Anybody know what this shape is called?
Right angle.
A right angle. Soldiers would have called it a salient. So salient is a right angle. It can be hit by fire at a range of 270 degrees. It's a dangerous position to have, but Ireland feels that that is the necessary position so that he can protect his flank, because when you refuse the flank, that enemy has to go even further around in order to get to your side or rear. So Ireland orders the right flank to refuse, to take up a position in the traverse at right angles to the main part of the line. He's given up a part of the defenses. Lower Culp's Hill has been captured by Confederate forces. Soldier out of the Maryland, 2nd Maryland Battalion writes, "The few remaining men in the regiment were formed on the right of the brigade, and very soon thereafter we were ordered forward, the line advancing beautifully under the heaviest fire until we found our regiment alone, moving to the front, unsupported, when the officers and men were ordered to withdraw, which was done slowly and without confusion, the regiment being greatly reduced. Now, Cohen describes the movement when they fall back as without confusion. But up to that point, I think it is confusion that rules the day. First of all, this attack is moving forward in darkness. So they can't see. You just simply follow. And if you're being fired at, what is going to be your conclusion? Who would fire at you?
Your enemy.
Your enemy. So if you're being fired at, that must be who you fire back at. What's the problem when you have this sort of up and down terrain? You don't know exactly if it's your enemy directly in front of you. We're going to have an incident of friendly fire over here on Culp's Hill where Confederate soldiers take fire from their front. They're certain that it is the Union Army directly in front of them, so they fire forward. And they actually fire into the backs of their own men on mistake. What has happened? The lay of the land, somehow when that Union unit fires, they must have aimed too high. So the bullets fly over, and as they drop, they hit a second line. So there's a great deal of confusion that is taking place trying to organize this assault at night. Still, this Confederate attack presses forward and is going to press against this traverse position very heavily. The right flank of the Union line is in perilous danger. Yet as soon as this fight had begun, notices was sent to the other parts of the Army. And the idea was hopefully to call back the 12th Corps. That doesn't happen, but some reinforcements do come. The 6th Wisconsin and the 84th New York, otherwise known as the 14th Brooklyn, will move from the top of Culp's Hill. They will rush down through this area as we've walked. They will add themselves right at the position of the traverse to firm up Ireland's right flank. He gets about 300 soldiers worth of reinforcements, and he is able to hold that position. Confederate soldiers stall their attack at about 10 p.m. So the fighting ends on the night of July 2nd. The Union Army has held their position here along Upper Culp's Hill, thanks to the reinforcements and the refusing of the flank. Confederate attack with a 5-1 advantage against the end of the line manages to take Lower Culp's Hill. So Confederate soldiers have a portion of the Union high ground, those defenses, from where they can launch their July 3rd attacks. If you follow me, we're going to move over to Lower Culp's Hill and talk about this fighting on July 3rd when Confederate soldiers renew their assaults and try to take advantage of the one piece of Union high ground that they hold at the end of July 2nd. For a second, gentleman asked a question about how did they accidentally hit a second line instead of the front line first of them. Okay, so let's take a look at the terrain here. The large boulder right in front of me here to my left marks the 14th Brooklyn, or 84th New York, rushing to this spot in the battlefield to assist. So this traverse is probably just on the other side of that boulder and runs from in front of us, so in front of these two trees, runs across our front toward the direction of the Union Monument over there on the right, the opposite side of the woods. So again, we're going to pull up our map here just briefly. What I just pointed out, that traverse, is this black mark here. It runs at a right angle to the line. So again, let's turn back, look at the terrain. From our vantage point, the terrain goes down and it comes back up again. There's this little gully that basically separates Upper and Lower Culp's Hill. If you're a Union soldier and you hear or you've been fired at, and you fire from this position forward, you might hit soldiers on that other hill who are higher up, or it may be that your bullets, if you're doing an oblique fire more to the left, go sort of through that gully. So there are a number of possible explanations as to how that second line gets hit. It comes back to the fact that there is a quick change in the terrain over a short amount of distance and in pitch black the only light are the flashes of the muzzle, there's so much confusion you don't know exactly who it is that you're aiming at who has fired at you. So there's a great sense of confusion. I like to say that if it feels confusing to be in this part of the battlefield, that's very accurate. That had to be what these soldiers and what these commanders witnessed as well. Any questions about that? All right, great. So what we'll do is we'll continue down, back up onto Lower Culp's Hill. We've come to the position that is called Lower Culp's Hill. This is the only part of the Union high ground that Confederate soldiers capture on July 2nd and hold moving into July 3rd. So we think about those objectives on July 2nd for the Confederate Army as attackers. This is the only spot that they have actually managed to get. Now, get, of course, means if we turn around, we are mere yards from the Union position. Union and Confederate soldiers overnight of July 2nd into July 3rd are in very close quarters. Thinking about our map here, we are now at the end of where Greene's July 2nd line was at, up here on Lower Culp's Hill, the end of the attacks. The breastworks had extended past us further on your right, but these men were not able to hold that entire distance. So pass this map around again. Thinking about what the physical terrain looks like, this is a picture of the 2nd Maryland Infantry Monument just here on your right when it was placed. So this is a picture of what the ground looks like in the 1880s. We can see that it is wooded, but it doesn't have that undergrowth. On the reverse, the physical effects of fighting. All of those black marks in the trees, those are areas where bullets hit the physical landscape. So a tremendous amount of change will take place as a result of this fighting. Both sides are going to add more soldiers onto this part of the battlefield. At about midnight, that 12th Corps that had moved off to fight in a different part of the battlefield returns. As they return, their trenches are occupied, not by their fellow Union soldiers, but by Confederate soldiers. So the Union Army has to stop about 100 or so yards behind you. They lost part of their trenches because they had been drawn out to another part of the battlefield. So the 12th Corps returns. They get a little bit of reinforcements from the Union 6th Corps. We have about 10,000 or so Union soldiers fighting here on July 3rd. On the Confederate side, they're going to get 4 additional brigades: O'Neill, Daniels, Walker, and Smith. So they get reinforcements as well. Their attacking number is about 10,000. So almost equal soldiers on each side when we talk about July 3rd. The plans for this day for each army differ. Confederate soldiers want to continue what has happened on July 2nd. So Lee's plan originally calls for the assaults to begin here. He wants to see if he can make advantage of taking this very spot, Little Culp's Hill, and move and take the Upper Culp's Hill, eventually moving toward Cemetery Hill. And he's going to strike an assault beginning from the other side of the line as well, move his cavalry around the army. This is Lee's 3-pronged plan early in the morning. It's going to change in part of because of what happens here. On the Union side, Union Army is going to remain defensive except for one spot. Commander of the 12th Corps is going to obtain permission to launch assaults to retake Lower Culp's Hill. So both sides want this piece of ground on July 3rd. The fighting is going to begin at about 4:30 a.m., basically at sunrise. There will be 6 hours of sustained fighting here on Culp's Hill from 4:30 in the morning until 10:30 a.m. The Confederate soldiers renew their assaults against the part of the line where Union soldiers are in the trenches. But they've received reinforcements. They are no longer one line arm to arm. They are now shoulder to shoulder and 2 lines deep. They are able to prevent a very effective defensive force. Union artillery would begin to fire at about dawn, shells coming this way. some of those shells are actually going to fall upon Union soldiers. A Pennsylvania colonel becomes very upset with the amount of confusion that is taking place in this part of the battlefield. He will draw his pistol, he will walk back to the guns, and he will threaten the gunners. The next time one of their shells land amongst his men, he'll make use of that pistol. Cooler heads will prevail and step in and provide the communication that is necessary so that they are not men shooting themselves on purpose. Instead, the Union soldiers are going to take a defensive position, Confederate soldiers attacking. Confederate soldiers will move off of this position here, trying to dislodge those Union reinforcements. Private Thomas, 2nd Maryland. We fixed bayonets and advanced. Soon we're in full view of the enemy, but also some disorder and confusion. There seemed no commander, or his orders did not go forward. The left and center of the brigade halted in disorder and opened fire, the enemy pouring in death volleys. Our only safety lie in charge, but no, steady. Steady was the oft-repeated order while the men were being mowed down. Still we advanced to within 40 feet of the enemy. Then someone ordered us to retire. All broke for cover, but I fear few found it. I fired and was about to turn when I was stricken down by a ball in my hip coming out in the front of my stomach. So Confederate soldiers renewing their assaults, hoping to push off these Union reinforcements, take those entrenchments that they could not take the previous night, find that it is very desperate fighting. Multiple times they move forward, they cannot dislodge the Union soldiers. Union Army counterattacks and it will retake this position on Lower Culp's Hill. Further to your right, Confederate soldiers will have a rock wall for defense. There, when the Union soldiers move forward, they find out how desperate it is to attack against a defended position. One of the Union colonels getting that order supposedly replies, "It is murder, but it is an order." And Confederate soldiers behind the stone wall, Union soldiers, move across that open field near Spangler Spring and try to take the Confederate position, and the Confederate defenders fire from protection as had happened to them earlier in the day. It becomes a very difficult place to fight. The Confederate soldiers hold that wall, but they cannot hold this hill. Lower Culp's Hill has been given up. On Upper Culp's Hill, the Confederate soldiers make no headway. These Union soldiers have these breastworks. They are well designed, well engineered. As the guns of the Union soldiers foul up from being fired, one unit leaves and another walks in. The traverse comes this protected tunnel moving back and forth so that units can reload and clean their guns behind the lines and swap in and out through these 6 hours of the morning of July 3rd. Nowhere along that line is heavily engaged are Confederate soldiers successful. Culp's Hill will remain in the hands of the Union soldier. About 10,000 soldiers from each side will fight here on July 3rd. The numbers seem even, but the terrain is not. The prepared defenses, the challenges for Confederate soldiers of attacking uphill will make it a decided Union advantage. It is still some of the roughest fighting on the battlefield. One soldier says this about his experience fighting in the blue line along these breastworks. The appearance of the men as they worked in the trenches, with their clothes ragged and dirty, their faces black from smoke, sweat, and burnt powder, their lips cracked and bleeding from saltpeter and the cartridges bitten by them, and while loading and firing for dear life, resembled more the inhabitants of the bottomless pit than the quiet, peaceful citizens of the United States of America. The people at home would not have recognized their friends, and a father would have been perplexed to know his own son. Imagine the inability to identify your friend or family member, because fighting in this terrain dealing with that saltpeter cracking the lips has changed the physical appearance of a soldier. It is indeed a heavy toll in both mind and body. That toll extends to the physical landscape as well. The trees were stripped of their leaves, and in some instances of their bark. The trunks of the trees looked like target boards, and many had not a space upon them from the roots to high up in the branches, where a man could not put his head and not cover a bullet hole. The ground was covered with flattened bullets, and the rocks were pitted with lead marks. The devastation in front of the works was a sight which will be long remembered by those who saw it on the 4th of July morning. Yes, it is a horrid sight which no pen can accurately describe. The Union Army will lose about 1,100 casualties here. The Confederate Army about 2,700 casualties. The Confederate Army either had a 4-to-1 manpower advantage on July 2nd or even numbers on July 3rd, yet they have casualties 2.5 times as many. There can be but one conclusion. These breastworks are very valuable to the saving of a life, as George Sears Green asserted. Indeed, understanding the fighting here and why one side wins or loses, you must look at this leadership. The Union Army will make mistakes, but they manage to overcome their mistakes, and they have better leadership providing for them to take advantage of the terrain, and so they win. On the Confederate side, they have a lot of challenges trying to coordinate these assaults, attacking uphill, attacking at night, not being sure of where the units are at, unit soldiers writing that they have gone forward without commanders. It is very difficult to stay in these lines on a battlefield, and we find that illustrated here on Culp's Hill, July 2nd and July 3rd. That fighting, as I mentioned, is sustained 6 hours long, and it disrupts Lee's plan. It takes away one of his elements for July 3rd. He will later adjust his other attacks in the field slightly northward, and that'll become what we know of as Pickett's charge. So the fighting that happens here on July 2nd and July 3rd shapes how this battlefield is fought. Greene's decision to place breastworks here are absolutely critical to the outcome of the battle. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Was Greene's brigade hand-selected, or was it the luck of the draw that that's the position his brigade was in when the orders came to pull out?
I think it's a little bit of both. So perhaps the luck is that if any other brigade is chosen, there's a gap between them and the rest of the Army. So Greene's is that brigade that has contact with soldiers further to the left, being Cemetery Hill. So if his brigade is moved out, another brigade has to be switched in position. So I think that's why his brigade is left. And they're the one brigade that's closest that can be left behind, and then they spread out, basically arm's length apart to try to move down and cover this space that has been left.
So the Confederate side, the night of at 10 o'clock at night, it finishes with 1,400 men across from you. And by 4:30 in the morning, you got 10,000. I mean, this close, they certainly can hear what's going on.
They absolutely can hear what's going on. Both sides know that the other side is reinforcing. We will get, years and years after the battle, a myth is going to develop about this spring down here to your right called Spangler Spring. This myth develops that the soldiers overnight share water with each other. Well, there's not a document that says that. One of the historians here, when he did his research for a book project, found 3 accounts. The accounts don't tell us that they shared water together. The accounts tell us that Union soldiers were going to move forward to get water. They heard Confederates and backed off because they didn't want to have a confrontation. They don't want to be fighting each other in the middle of the night. So you're right, these lines are in very close quarters as they deal with each other. So you have to have a constant level of awareness. How much sleep are you going to get if you have that constant awareness that you could be attacked? Not very much. So where that Union soldier in the night of July 2nd says, we were sick in both body and mind, that physical, emotional toll continues overnight into the next day.
So, why didn't why? I'm curious why the Confederates didn't try to take a flanking position even further down. Was it they're concerned about being split from the rest of the Confederate army then?
Yeah, you've got it.
Okay.
So what you're alluding to, the challenge of the attacker, right?
Yeah.
You want to do two things. You want to move so that you hit the enemy's flank, but somewhere there's a limit to how much you can sweep around so that you still have contact with your own army. And that's the inexact science of being a commanding general. You've got to use your discernment and your experience to kind of make that decision. I can go this far to flank, but I can't go that 100 or that 200 or that quarter mile further. So that's a tough decision for a commanding general, the balance between I want to make that move around and how far is too far. And so looking at it as historians, what we can kind of say is, well, they made the decision that night that this far was the as far as possible. Hypothetically, could they have decided to try to go farther to sweep around? It's a possibility. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to make a quick judgment and think that these commanders are foolish for not continuing to go around, because there's another part of that calculus that's tough. It is a decision that has to be made. So yeah, it's a great question to bring up.
Why does this attack not happen until the night of July 2nd? Like, if Longstreet's attacking the southern portion of the field, why did this attack not happen at the same time?
Right. The original idea is to have the attack happen at the same time. The challenge here is that Union artillery that is on Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. So when the Confederate attack, Longstreet's attack, begins at about 4 p.m., the Confederate artillery to the north is going to begin firing. The Union artillery on Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill is able to drive off that attacking Confederate artillery. The Confederate infantry commanders witnessing this figure out that that is such a commanding position that they cannot send their soldiers forward through that space between the two sets of guns without losing all of them. This turns out to be a very wise decision. Confederate soldiers probably did not know this, but might have suspected it. What Union artillerists on Stevens Knoll and Cemetery Hill do is they pull out a device called the French ordnance glass, or also they'll use a pendulum hawse. And these are two devices that help you figure out the elevation and the range. So imagine that you have sort of a scientific experiment with a gun, and you're trying to figure out how far your gun fires. What these soldiers do is they take a bunch of test shots in this area between the two armies. So Union cannoneers over this afternoon of July 2nd, while these 12th Corps soldiers are building breastworks, what they're doing is they're checking points in the field. And they have marked this field so that if Confederate soldiers come through it, they'll know exactly what type of shell and how long of a fuse to use to be able to hit them. So it would have been a very deadly field of fire, and Ewell and Johnson, the Confederate commanders, will decide that they have to wait until cover of night to move forward. Yeah, it's a great question to ask.
Yep.
Any others?
So the Confederate artillery you're talking about, that was Benner's Hill? Is that the name
Yes,
of it?
yeah, very good. It is Benner's Hill, right. And so Benner's Hill is the one spot further to the east where Confederate artillery commanders can find what they think is semi-good ground, but they're driven off very quickly. And their challenge is that, they're lower, so this shot's falling upon them, and their guns don't have the ability to push a projectile back uphill. Field artillery has that very long parabolic curve. What you would need is you would need what's called siege artillery. And the armies rarely carry any siege artillery with them. Siege artillery are the cohorns of these little guns that are pointed up at 45 degrees, and those have the high arcing shots. But there are none of those with either army here at the Battle of Gettysburg.
So where was the? Sorry. Where
No,
was the rock
please
wall
ask the
that
questions, yeah.
The Confederates built. Was it over that way? Somewhere?
So it's not built, it is actually here on the field. And the rock wall actually extends to this wooded area over here, and then it continues running to the left. We have enough grass growth that we can't see it from our spot, but if you walk about 50 yards, you can find that rock wall and follow it off to the left. Down here at the bottom is what we call stop number 13, or Spangler Spring. And there's an open field, and in the middle of that field is the state monument for Indiana. Indiana Unit 27th is one of those two units that makes that charge across. And so they have sort of the opposite effect of what the Union soldiers have here, and a little bit more of that experience that most of the Confederate soldiers have had this day.
Interesting. So the rock walls, they were just like natural, like walls that people would put up for their property use.
Yeah, rock walls in the battlefield, with a couple exceptions, are property and boundary markers that farm owners would have built. The exceptions are over on Little Round Top. Those rock walls are built by soldiers after the fighting. They're built at night from July 2nd to July 3rd. But elsewhere in the battlefield, generally when you see rock walls and fence lines, you're looking at something that we think was in that area in 1863. That's been one of the historic preservation management goals of the park, to rehabilitate the physical landscape so that when you come here, you're looking at rock walls the way that soldiers looked at rock walls and commanders looked at rock walls. We're not perfect, right? We don't manage a cattle operation, so we've got some of this underbrush. But you know, as we look sort of at the tops of the trees, we can get an idea of the density of the woods here and know something about what these soldiers and what these commanders saw as they were fighting on the battlefield.
So, like any of the remnants of the bullets that went through the trees, that's probably all like grown out at this point, right? I mean, or do you?
After 151 years, yeah, it's grown out.
Yeah.
You know, in our archival collection, we do have many bullets that are picked up off the battlefield. Relic hunting is illegal on a battlefield. It can't be done. This is honestly one of the worst places to do it, because so many things have been picked up here previously. Occasionally, rain, weather will shift soil. So if you ever do encounter something when you're on the battlefield, we ask you to just let a ranger know. We like to leave it in the original context. That way we can see, you know, how it came to the surface. It has now been almost 20 years, but there was a set of remains of a soldier found at the railroad cut on the first day's field. About 5 to 10 years ago, soldiers' remains were discovered down at the Battle of Antietam. You know, so anytime you are on a Civil War battlefield, there can be remnants of the battle, including those who sacrificed their lives here.